a question that somebody had sent in. They just wanted to know what was putting grass into the borer holes. Now, this is an oval-shaped hole. This is a longicorn borer pupation gallery. That means that's where it's going. So they eat in the phloem cambium, this group. The phloem cambium's high in sugar and soft tissue, and then they pupate in the wood itself and exit from their pupal chamber as an adult beetle. And that was from Mona. So there's the answer to that one. Genus and species, no idea. I can tell you that is the actual wasp there. And that is a image from Google. So I'm pretty sure that if someone wanted to put a few more hours into it, you may well be able to find or name the wasp. The great thing is it's not an issue in terms of plant health, but what it does show you is the complex ecology that is associated with trees. So here's a wasp that in part is dependent on borer holes to survive. And oftentimes we think of those sort of things as a negative thing when it comes to trees, rather than realizing that there can be actually positive components to that whole process as well. It's also interesting to note there's a long-tailed wasp that predates on Cerambycidae, particularly the Phoracantha group. So again, that's this ecology. It's not just a one-sided deal. It's a multifaceted deal. And that's the way it's going to be in most cases. So anyone else got a question about something they've seen or a sample they've got in the last week? Now's the time to speak up. Otherwise,
I don't have a sample, but I do have a question.
Yeah, go.
So we've been inspecting a lot of Eucalyptus camadulensis, and they're getting absolutely destroyed by lerp. Is there anything that we can do to try to manage the insect, these pests? Because some of those eucalyptus are remnants. They're probably, several hundred years old, and it would be a shame to lose them.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll deal with several things in that one conversation, one question. Great question. There are things that you can do. There are insecticides, and you've got this weighing process again in any time you're looking at some form of chemical control. But there are many insecticides that are highly effective against Hemiptera. That's the group of insects that you're talking about. And psyllids can cause mass devastation. The grey box psyllid outbreak of Sydney killed about 20-odd thousand trees over a period of about 12 years. There's lots of work done on it. I published an article in the Bark a few years ago that talks about some of those issues. So temperature is critical. There's a Polyphages wasp, so it eats psyllids. It's what we call a parasitoid. So to define my word, a parasitoid is a parasite that destroys its host. So the wasp comes along, lays a single egg in the nymph, and then takes over the nymph, eats it out completely, and then comes out as an adult wasp. So there's a temperature relationship with that wasp, and I cite White on that in the paper. You get some imbalances that go on. The next thing is how some of these psyllids work is complex in terms of some, for example, and it was certainly the case with grey box psyllid, which is a Cardia species, is that the stressing the tree has an advantage. When the tree is stressed, it actually has a higher concentration of proteins in the cytosol, inside the juices inside the cell. It's the cytosol. So when that cytosol has an increased level of protein, it advantages the psyllid. And of course, that means that the psyllid creates stress, and then it takes advantage of that. I don't know what genus of psyllid is attacking your red gums. Has it got a covering on it, Michele?
I think so, yes.
Okay, so there's two basic groups of psyllids. Ones with covering, they're covered with a psyllid or a test or a lerp. A test or a lerp is the name of the covering they make. the other sort's naked, and there are some naked psyllids that also affect eucalypts. So, and other species of tree, Tristaniopsis, Lophostomen, those sort of things again can be attacked by psyllids. There's a naked psyllid that does Melaleuca. That's quite a problem. And you'll notice when you see Melaleucas, they've often got a sooty mold underneath them. That sooty mold is the result of a naked psyllid. So there is some work that shows that bell miner associated decline is strongly related to the bell miner's control of psyllid populations. And there's work that shows that there's a correlation between understory and BMAD. So if you've got bell miners around, that may be a contributing factor. Ultimately, the decision is, do you treat or not treat? I think one of my big regrets is I only had one grey box left on the property here when I bought it. We got the grey box psyllid outbreak, and I didn't treat that tree early, and I, as a result, ended up losing it. And I regret that. It was just a great tree in a great spot. So I think, yeah, it's a weighing up situation, that situation, Michele. What we do know is that these outbreaks, as they're known, these things where things get really out of kilter, rectify themselves over time, but sometimes after considerable damage. And repeated ongoing infestations of some psyllids are fatal on trees. Others have no effect at all. So, for example, brown lace lerp, which is again a Cardia spina, on Eucalyptus robusta has, not too many problems, but it has significant issues on a number of the box species. So does that answer that question for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Chemical wise, neonicotinoids, spinosads, pyrethroids, pyrethrum. Pyrethrum is a bit more difficult if you've got a covering. All of those have some beneficial effects. You're in Victoria, so your legislation in terms of insecticides is a lot more liberal than those of us in New South Wales and Canberra. Queensland is more similar to yours, so you are able to use some of those things. Peter Gray may have just dropped out again. I'm just concerned, did he? Let me just check. No, he's there. Okay. Sorry, Peter, you just disappeared and I thought you might have dropped. Your mic's off. So, yes, in most cases, there's something that we can do when it comes to insects. When it comes to those more unusual things, viruses, phytoplasms, microplasms, there's a lot less that can be done. Fungi, but insects are largely, we can have an impact if we have outbreaks. The problem that you found is that not only do you get it on one tree, but you get broad area infections. And that's, you can have an impact on a single tree or a single group of trees, but you're not going to have an impact on the whole area. That's just not possible. Okay, well, with that in mind, the question then becomes, what sort of insects attack trees? And I'll encourage participants to start thinking about some of those and start listing down what insects do you know of that are problematic for trees in terms of orders. And we'll go over the characteristics that help you distinguish or identify them. Peter, I think your mic's off.
Yes, I'm leaving the mic off so you won't hear me burst into coughing period.
I think, okay, sorry. Yep, I thought you were speaking. I didn't realize you were coughing, sorry. Okay, well, let's start by defining some entomological terms and making sure that we understand them clearly. The first word is life cycle, and life cycle is talking about how the insect goes through doing the things that it's going to do. So let me see if I can find for you some insect shots. Now, straight up off the bat, what does that look like?
That's a larvae.
It's a larvae, yeah. So it's a larvae of a a ladybird in this case. And so it looks very different to the adult. And these guys that have larvae, caterpillars, grubs, whatever you want to call those guys, they are insects that go through a complete metamorphosis, often called a holometabolous life cycle. They've got a complete change. Others have a fairly insignificant change, and their young look like they're adults. So here's one. This is a orange Brunswick bug on a, this one's on a, can't think, Cupaniopsis. So Cupaniopsis is rutaceae, Citrus is rutaceae, so there's some crossover, but it doesn't seem to get into heavy populations. But this looks like an insect, it looks like a bug, it looks normal. And so this is one of those that has an incomplete life cycle. And by incomplete, we mean it's got egg, nymph, 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 adult. And so there's this progression that's gradual. And so sometimes this is called a gradual metamorphosis or a hemimetabolous life cycle. So we have those two basic life cycles. So that's one of the things that we're going to use. The adults look like insects, but the life cycle splits them into two groups. So what's an insect? And it's not so clear on something like this little guy here, but it is clear on others. Insects are made up of three parts. They've got a head, a thorax, and down under here an abdomen. We really need to see it from the underside. So let me see if I can find you an underside shot. Okay, there we are. So we've got a head, this case not so obvious, a thorax to here, and an abdomen. The legs come from the thorax. And there are three pairs of legs. Now, there's some weird and wonderful exceptions that break rules, but three pairs of legs. Some are legless, so that doesn't help, but none have more than three pairs of legs. So again, we've got a head, a thorax, and thorax stops just in under here in the abdomen. So that's the standard pattern that you're going to see. And you can see that at the nymph stage, we've got a head, the pupal stage, we head, thorax, and abdomen again. So that's our definition. For that reason, there are some creatures that don't fit into the insect category that have six legs. So they're not insects. They're in their own little group. Springtails is a good example of that. And springtails are tiny little creatures that usually aren't a problem for trees, but you'll see them in water, in soil. Springtail. And no, I thought I might have opened up one for you. There's a drawing of a springtail. So it doesn't fit into that little group of insects. It's in its own little group. And if you compare that with a spider only has two body parts and four pairs of legs. Oh, so usually there are some in that spider group or the arachnid group that have six pairs of legs, or racae mites. Some of the mites only have three pairs of legs. If you look at a standard spider, it's got a cephalothorax and an abdomen. So it's got two parts only and four pairs of legs. So that lets you pick those guys apart. So we've used the word life cycle. The next word we're going to use is generation. So how many generations a year is not the same as how many life cycles. There's only one life cycle. It's the life cycle. But going through a complete life cycle makes a generation. And so we want to know often how many generations. And something like the psyllid that you're talking about becomes an issue because you can get multiple generations in a year. So if I can again, you can get huge number of generations. And in fact, with some insects, you can find all generational stages at the same time. And here's a pretty good example. This is eggs hatching. This is first instar. Now, instar is one of the steps in the growing stage. So insects have an exoskeleton. We have a skeleton on the inside. These guys have it on the outside. And interestingly enough, it has a chemical in it called chitin. Chitin is often the chemical, or it is the chemical that we find in fungi, in the cell wall of the fungi. So these guys have a chitinous exoskeleton, and they fill it and they grow into it. Well, the problem is when you get so big, you've got to get rid of that exoskeleton, that outer skin. And so these guys go through that process several times before they become an adult. And again, these are very broad guidelines because some insects never reach adulthood. They reach sexual maturity, but never reach a physiological maturity. That is, they always look like a youngster, and that's a process they call neonate, or essentially never really fully growing up. So on something like this during the warm seasons, this is Peropsis, or the leaf beetle. You can have all stages going. So this is first instar, second instar. This is the last instar before turning into an adult, and there are no beetles there. Oh, hang on, look at that. Even more instars. Look at that. One, so babies, 1, 2, 3, 4 instars before becoming an adult. And so we've got these steps. Once you become a pupae, as this is only for the complete metamorphosis. Once you become a pupae, then there's only one stage after that, and that's adult. So we get things go through that process. So that's some entomological terms. Some other important entomological terms are terms relating to things that they feed on. Oh, by the way, that's a good shot there that just shows you larvae, pupae, adult. So that's the, there's this larval stage, a pupal stage, and this is, if you want to look at something that's fantastic in terms of documentaries, find something on what they call the Methuselah generation and things like the pupation of insects. There's a whole pile of amazing biology going on because one part of an organism is disappearing and another part of an organism is coming into being. So this is really quite fascinating biology. So yes, different things feed on different things. So for example, things that eat plants, we often say they're phytophages, that is, they're plant eating. Things that eat wood, we call xylophages, meaning xylem eating. Things that eat other insects, insectophages, insectivores. We have things that eat crap. So for example, ants that feed on the honeydew from insects, coprophages. Not the thing to say to a police officer, by the way. So coprophages simply means crap eating. Dogs are coprophages. Brush-tailed possums are coprophages. Brush-tailed possums poop out their soft crap and eat again. Rabbits, again, another animal that does that. So we have this process of different things feeding in different ways. And just so I get an idea, and I need feedback from you guys, you don't have to turn your video on, but at least use your microphone. How or what different ways do you know of that insects feed on trees? Anyone?
So they suck on.
Yes, so some insects suck, they don't. They're really fantastic. But
Yes,
some insects,
some others they eat the actual leaf. There's some they eat the whole
leaf
leaf.
chewing, yeah.
Some they skeletonize a layer of the leaf. They just eat one layer.
Yep.
Others they eat the wood, as we just said.
Yep.
Some others, I think they eat the twigs, the bark, when they run out of leaves matter to eat, or buds, flowers, they eat flowers.
Yep. So, and we've seen, just as I've been skipping through my images, you've seen some of those things actually in the process of happening. So, for example, this Lepidoptera larvae, so this is a caterpillar larvae, has been feeding inside the stem of a eucalyptus. Okay, so that's one of the cossid moths. This one here, Lepidoptera, is a mining insect, so it's feeding in the tissue, in the mesophyll tissue inside the leaf. So again, we can start to classify our insects based on the things that they're chewing or sucking, how they're doing it. And so that'll help us break things down into more categories. So each of these things give us a way of looking at how we can classify our creatures. And Michele, you're absolutely right. There are all ways that these things can affect and attack a tree. So the question is, what orders of insects then attack and what do they do? And I'll start giving some of those out. And then I've got a one-page handout that I'll give to Peter. It's actually 2 pages. One is about the insect orders and give some examples. And Peter will make that available in the Dropbox. Peter, I don't think this group has been told how to access the Dropbox yet. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about that. I will certainly make sure that I post that information.
Okay, great. So Peter will at some stage let you know once the stuff's there, so you can go and get that sort of information from the thing. So I guess let's start with, Michele, he's talking, no one else is. So Michele, what insect, give me an insect you know of that might be a problem for a tree.
Oh, you do have, as we said, a psyllid.
Psyllid, okay. So
Psyllid can cause a problem. There's some caterpillars that I don't know the species, unfortunately, that can cause
let's
issues.
start with just one. Psyllid's great. So psyllids belong to a group of insects that are sap sucking, and then we put that in the one little group and we say sap sucking. Unfortunately, sap sucking is a horrible name. And it's a horrible name because we're not sure what is meant by the word sap. There's a whole pile of different sap that gets sucked. Let me explain that. Some sap sucking occurs in the phloem. That is, insects put their proboscis, that's the little pointed bit, into the phloem and start sucking sugar out of the phloem. The phloem conducts sugar, sucrose. And so that's one sort of sap sucking. That's the stuff that I normally think of as sap. But there are other saps, and arguably it's the case. Some are cytosol feeding. By cytosol, remember, that's the inside fluids inside a cell. So it's not sucking sugar out of a conductive tube now. It's sucking the inside of a cell out and it kills them. And a lot of our psyllids that cause damage are cytosol feeders. That is, they feed from the inside of the cell and destroy the cell in the process. The next type of sap sucker is one that feeds on the xylem, and they're fairly rare. I only know of one group that do that, and they're cicadas. And I postulate, it's only a theory or a concept, but I postulate the concept that sap-sucking insects that feed on the xylem, cicadas, don't get a good healthy diet with lots of stuff in it because they're basically getting a water solution. Some solutes, but nowhere near the concentration that there will be in the cytosol, for example. And so they take longer to reach maturity. And I suspect that's one of the reasons they take so long to get to that stage. Here is a picture of a Hemiptera.
Mark, just excuse me, Mark. Just to clarify, I thought that cicadas spend most of their life underground eating roots?
They don't eat roots. They have no eating mouth parts because every stage of a Hemiptera has a proboscis, not a chewing mouth part. So underground, they actually take water out of the root system. So yes, they do feed on the roots. They puncture through the phloem and into the xylem and the roots and take water up. So it's largely water. And one of the things that you see from an adult perspective is that adult cicadas can create a thing called Cicada Rain. And that's where they, let me find you a quick video of it. Hopefully you'll be able to see it.
So the adults are also feeding?
The adults are feeding, yes. They're feeding on, oh yeah. There's a picture that shows you Cicada Rain. It's essentially pooping on you. And you can go watch one of these videos later on, but first time I had this ever happen was at the leaning tree at Glenifer, and found myself, I don't know whether that you can see that at all. Let me go to a bigger screen. And the biggest possible screen. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And because this is an interesting, I'd be careful, but yeah, I was under a tree and I saw all this water and I thought, boy, somebody's come here and had a pee. And eventually I realized that that it wasn't a pee, it was, well, it was poop, essentially. What happens in this situation is the cicadas, the water is not good for them. The water doesn't give them any nourishment, so they get rid of the waste product. For most sap-sucking insects, the waste product's not what you think it would be, it's sugar. Sugar is not very good for building muscle, for building body, for building size. Amino acids are how we build body, proteins, and it's the same for insects. So they go through a process that's sometimes referred to as denitrification. They take the stuff with nitrogen and sulfur and those sort of things out, and the excess stuff, they don't want the sugar, they crap out. So they're designed not to put on weight like we would. If you ate a whole pile of sugar, you put on weight. And these guys have figured that out, so they don't go through that process. So yes, Peter, you're absolutely right. They do feed on the roots, but this is a problem of how we use language. When we say feed on the roots, they're not chewing the roots, they're actually taking water out. And so cicada populations cause problems with dehydration. Okay, in fact, Hemiptera generally can. You know, this year I had a big infestation on my pomelo from orange bronze bug, and you could tell that it was going on because the tips were wilting. And that wilting is because they were sucking out so much fluid with their taking the phloem that they were causing problems. So heavy populations of cicadas cause moisture stress for trees. Of course, if there's good moisture levels and the soil moisture is great, is not necessarily a huge problem. And there are big problems in America where you get what's called Generation X. It occurred in 2021, and due to COVID lockdown, I wasn't able to go out and see it. But that's where the population of cicadas in the northeast of America in particular get to plague proportions. It's just every so many generations. It's one more to come in my lifetime, I think. So Generation X, if you're interested in going over and seeing that. So now that's a fairly big proboscis. Not all proboscises are as obvious as that. On some of the sap-sucking insects, they're microscopic and you need to go have a look with great details. Another group of insects that do have a proboscis are the butterflies at the adult stage. They have a long proboscis. Proboscis is just another name for a nose, I guess. It's a feeding part of their feeding mouth part in the case of these guys. So we've had them feeding on phloem. without them feeding the cytosol, without them feeding in xylem. Another place these guys can feed is on other insects. And I don't know that I've got, I do definitely have a shot. I don't know that I can do it off the top of my head. But things like the assassin bug, let me try bug and see whether I can pull one up for you quickly. They suck the insides out of insects. So we have insects that feed upon insects. And I'm not going to spend a whole pile of time looking for one. If you want me to find your photograph, I will. I've got video of it occurring as well. So that's one group of insects, is those that have this modified mouth part. There's some other insect orders. So Hemiptera, sap sucking insects. Next one that's similar to it are Thysanoptera. And Thysanoptera again have a modified mouth part. They don't have a chewing mouth part. They have a rasping and palping mouth part. And let me show you some thrips. I've got a few. So thrips are Thysanoptera. And most thrips aren't big issues. These are some nymphs. So they go through, again, an incomplete metamorphosis. So there's something there to give you a hint. If you're seeing a larval stage that looks like an adult, then maybe it's something that goes through this sucking process. And these guys often leave tarry spots on leaves as adults. Most of them aren't problems on leaves. This one's Cuban Laurel Thrip. It's a problem on Ficus. A lot of thrips are good fellows. They're detrivores. That means they feed on dead or decaying material. In fact, the largest thrip in the world is an Australian thrip, and it feeds on dead eucalyptus litter. So one of the things that's characteristic about thrips is they have this feathery wing. So the wing looks like a feather, and they have a long pointed abdomen. So those are characteristics. And you can see that even in the nymph stage, this long pointed abdomen, the whole thing comes back to this point. So that's Thysanoptera. Unfortunately, we don't have too many Thysanoptera issues. Now, I will break the rules and say there is another group of insect that has arthropod that has a similar feeding pattern, and that is the mites. Mites, unfortunately, have some similar. I think there's a book, by the way, if you want on thrips, or a CD, I think that one might be. Thrips, mites, M-I-T-E-S. Mites are not insects, but mites have similar feeding patterns that can create problems. We'll talk about some of the secondary problems from that. So these are mites, and these are actually beneficial mites. So not all mites are bad. Again, not all sap-sucking insects are bad. Some insects are good. They go out and predate other insects. But you can see here, not a great image, but 4 pairs of legs. These are microscopic, fast-moving, incredibly annoying. They make threads of silk. Again, not the greatest of images, I apologize, but that's what we're working with, guys. These are tiny insects. Sorry, tiny arthropods, not insects. Easy enough to fall in and call them an insect. Mites are very hard to see, and one of the ways that I've found useful for finding mites is to set up my digital microscope and leave it on and wait to see them moving. So these are often from video frames that lets me know that there's a mite there. Now, let's talk about the effects of feeding in those different areas. I've already said sap-sucking insects like psyllids, and I'll pull up a shot of a psyllid, P-S-Y-L-L-D, that feed on the cytosol. They damage the leaves. So this is a Cardiospina species. This looks like brown lace lerp. These cells around here are all dead. They've been killed. Okay. So cytosol feeders kill the cell. It can often kill the cell. They don't have to, but they may. This psyllid here, by the way, is all black. The reason it's all black is it's got a wasp growing inside there. And if you want to find out what the wasp is, you can actually take this, put it in a container, and the wasp will often come out and emerge from that psyllid. So psyllids that feed on single cells, they can cause problems. One of the problems they cause is on young tissue, it causes distortion of the leaf. This is Syzygium, hard to believe, and this is dimple psyllid on Syzygium or lily-pilly. And this again is a cytosol feeder, and it causes the tissue not to expand properly, not to divide properly, and you get distorted leaves. And so one of the complications we get with things that attack the young bud is damage of that nature. So here, seed damage like this, the cytosol feeder is pretty obvious. Even if you can't see the psyllid from the ground, you're getting these localized patches of dying tissue. It's a good indication that you may have a cytosol feeder. Excuse me. And again, not a perfect shot, but this is a Carajon star psyllid. This is a naked psyllid, or almost naked. It carries around this little adornment at the back, but it doesn't ever cover itself. So this is just how it's processing the excess sugar. It's converting it to a waxy compound and then using it. So different psyllids, different ways. The comment that I made earlier on about damage, this is typical damage from grey box psyllid dieback in New South Wales, and you can see it just decimates trees. So it can go either way. One other problem that occurs with sap-sucking insects, and one of the things that you can look for diagnostically, apart from dead cells, is honeydew. Now, hopefully, I've got a few shots of that. Honeydew is no. Honeydew is, oh yes, I have here. Right. So honeydew is the black stuff under here that's now got sooty mold growing on it. So the excess sugar, the stuff that's pooped out by the insect, is called honeydew. It hits the surface below, and then you get a fungus, any one of a number of fungi that we call sooty mold growing on the leaf. That's that black stage. And that does affect photosynthesis, but more importantly, it's the removal of the sugars that's critical from the plant stage. When you're removing stuff from the phloem, that's stuff that would have gone down to the root system or up to a flower. And if it's not going down to the root system, it's not going into the storage system. And when it's not going to storage, the bank account for the plant is not getting built up. It's actually getting replenished. So often you'll lose vitality with it. And so when you see a lot of black under a tree, particularly if it's on one side, it's a pretty good guess that you're looking at a sap-sucking insect. And we looked at a number of my images over time, just went down. We'd find that process occurring with some of the sap-sucking insects. So another problem that does occur from sap-sucking insects is infection spread. And I had the mite shot up earlier on. I went out to look at a client's place and I thought, I wonder what's happening here. This is Ficus Pamelia, creeping fig, and we're getting all these areas of necrotic tissue. And it wasn't until I pulled out a loop's just a little magnifying glass, and looked at the underside that I could observe mites. So this was a viral, a mosaic virus being spread by mites. Mites again rasp through or tear through the cell and take stuff out of the cytosol. When they do, they can spread viruses. And the same thing is absolutely true of other things as well. Again, this is a virus spread by a mite. So the spreading of viruses is a common issue with sap sucking insect that feed in cells because they're introducing something. Beetles and Lepidoptera can do it, but it's far less common, often because the tree's defense system is isolating that area out. Here, the insect is putting something right inside the cell, right inside the cellular system. And so particularly those that are cytosol feeders can have the effect of spreading viruses. So that's Hemiptera. That's Thysanoptera. That's those ones that are rasping, sucking type insects. The rest are going to be chewing type. And so what we need to think about now is what they chew on and what some of their other characteristics are. So the next group are going to have again, an incomplete metamorphosis, and we'll go with termites. Now, I'm an old boy, so excuse me for this, but termites are often considered to be in their own little group, Isoptera, but some dude recently said, let's republish that. They're now a part of the group Blattodea, and Blattodea are the cockroaches. So termites are now a suborder in the cockroach family. And when you look at them, I guess you can see some similarities. Now, to be sure, let me not lie to you. This is a termite. This is one of my great finds, actually. As a guy called Isaac Dale turned it over and let me return it. This is a female. This is a queen. And her body is extended so much because she's been laying lots of eggs. That's all she does. Interesting that this is only a youngster. It'll get 5-10 times that size as she gets older. So the older she gets, the more her body stretches. So next time my wife wants to complain about the effects of childbirth, I'll show her a termite and say it could be worse. But you'll notice the nymph here has 6 legs. This nymph here has 6 legs. You can see the difference in size. There's some eggs there. They're tiny. So indeed, they have 6 legs at all stages. But they look a lot like the adult. So this has an incomplete metamorphosis, okay, or incomplete life cycle. And that makes sense if you think about cockroaches. And I don't know whether I can find a cockroach in my collection. I do have some. But I don't know whether I'm, oh yeah, okay. So there's some cockroaches. They're the adults, but if you've seen them around, woodies or young cockroaches, there we are, there's some woodies. That's the nymph stage, doesn't have wings. That's the adult stage, it does. So cockroaches, again, have an incomplete metamorphosis. So the pattern stays the same. Maybe here might be lucky. Yeah, there's a nymph stage, adult stage. They look very similar. Okay. So termites, incomplete metamorphosis. Termites are a problem rarely in trees. They one of the things that they do is they chew wood. But the part of the wood they chew is the inside, the heartwood, and it's usually not a problem. So mechanical failure due to termites is uncommon, but not impossible. Okay, let me say that again. It's uncommon, but not impossible. So termites generally aren't cause for concern in a tree. The place that are cause for concern is in buildings. And that's where they get this bad rap from. In fact, without termites, we wouldn't be able to move, and we'd probably have all sorts of opposite problems, because we'd have a whole pile of carbon building up, would be, tens to hundreds of meters deep in wood. We wouldn't be able to get rid of it all. So they're a major insect in breaking down wood. And so we say that termites are xylophages, that is, they're wood-eating insects. And I was just going to show you here, this here is an Utica. This is a female. An Utica is the egg capsule. And many species of cockroaches will carry the egg capsule around with them. So they've got some maternal nature. So they're not just all bad guys. They're about, well, there's well over 1,000 species of cockroaches, and about a dozen species worldwide are problems. That's not much different than arborists, is it? You know, for every 1,000 arborists, you've probably got 12 that are real problems, and most of the rest are okay.
So are you saying, Mark, that there's a strong comparison between cockroaches and arborists?
Oh no, cockroaches are a lot nicer. Sorry about that. It's just a good to understand that well, often we get these perception of things. In terms of building and termites, only a few species of termites are a problem for buildings, but they can be a problem for buildings. So that's another insect order that has this gradual metamorphosis. Another one is the grasshopper group, and the grasshopper group is called Orthoptera. And I should say that those of you who have kids will, at some stage or other, go through the dinosaur phase, and you'll have all come across the pterodactyl. Ptera means winged. Okay, that's what ptera is, wing. So pterodactyl means winged dragon. So a lot of these things here we have is the word ptera comes into it for some reason. So Isoptera, a Hymenoptera, a Coleoptera, and you can figure some of them out. And this one, Orthoptera, is talking about the straightening. So you go to an orthopedic surgeon, and of course he's dealing with straightening of limbs, so Orthoptera. And the major ones, and none of these are yet, are grasshoppers. Katydids. So katydids are like a grasshopper, and locusts. They're the three ones that affect trees. Now, I think we all know what a grasshopper looks like. I don't know that I've got too many shots. I've got a couple. Not coming up. It keeps on picking up other things. And it keeps on picking up other things because they do look similar. Like this guy here is the Lantana bug, and it's hemiptera. It's sap sucking. It is not. I think this is a grasshopper. Okay, not a great shot, but that's the sort of thing we're talking about. Grasshoppers tend not to be major problems on plant material, but they do get to plague proportions. So these are one of those insects, Michaela, that get to an outbreak level. We get good years and we get bad years. And, you know, we often talk about grasshopper country out west where things can go to plague proportion fairly quickly. And not so long ago, it was only about 2 or 3 years ago, we actually did have a locust plague in Australia. So a katydid looks like a grasshopper. One of the characteristics, and I do have a katydid shot that shows it, I'm pretty sure. I know who was dying, someone was. Katydids have a little hole in their front foreleg that helps in their receptive processes. And I can't find one there that'll let me see it. But that's the fundamental difference between a katydid and a grasshopper. Katydids are nocturnal. And my experience with them was a young kid, my grandfather would say to me, when we're looking at damage on a plant, he'd say, look, that's been caused by katydid. They're horrible things. They come down at night. And so they do chew on leaves, and you'll often not ever see signs of them because they're gone shortly after they've done the damage. They don't stick around like a lot of other things. So katydids, and I've never seen a plague proportion, and I've never seen mention of a plague proportion. So they all come from that group Orthoptera. Another group that fit in that unusual gradual metamorphosis are the Phasmatidae. Now you're going to ask me to spell that. There's not a chance in hell. But let's see how I go. An A missing. That's not too bad. I'll pass myself for that. The stick insects. And you wouldn't think they ever get to heavy populations, but they can get to outbreak populations again. So this is a whole different order. Usually you'll see 2 or 3. The Australian leaf like stick insects have become major insects in terms of pets worldwide. And they're overall great creatures. And occasionally you'll get them. The giant stick insect. I had a student bring one into class that was probably the best part of 18 inches in length. You know, we're talking about a creature this long. This long. So generally not a problem, and generally something that you want to encourage in trees. So, you know, having kids see them, having kids interact with them is pretty good. And they do have a similarity in their body type and build that can sometimes be deceptive. Hopefully this will open up pretty quickly. No, it didn't give me the shot that I wanted. Let's go back. Open image. New tab. Okay. So this is our stick insect. Long, lanky things. They're not all like that. Some of them, as you saw, are quite chunky. And sometimes they're confused for praying mantises. They're very different, but they've got a similar body shape. And praying mantises are all insectivores. Now, I'll say that and someone will come back to me and say, there's this particular one that's plant eating, and they're probably right. There's probably something that breaks the rules. The big difference with praying mantises is they have these long, heavily barbed, heavily armored front legs for catching and killing the prey. But yeah, some similarities in appearance. They also have big mandibles. They chew and kill things. So these guys are wonderful because they're predators. They're the good guys in the tree. And again, they have an Utica. And you'll have all seen this Utica if you've been around trees for a while. This is what it looks like. This is a praying mantis egg case. So again, something to keep an eye out for if you're thinking about a treatment program of saying, do I want to go out and necessarily spray? And here's somebody with offering praying mantis egg cases for sale for putting in your garden for that purpose of predation. So these are really good insectivores. So again, don't get them confused with the Phasmatidae group. So that's the insect orders that go through this gradual metamorphosis. There are a few other minor things that occasionally create problems, but they're so minor and irrelevant that for the purpose of this, we'll dismiss them as not being something we need to consider. So the rest are going to go through a whole metamorphosis. They're one of these complete life cycle ones. And the most common one of those that's a problem are the beetles. And there's a reason why beetles are the most common. Anyone want to guess and give me an answer rather than me speaking and going hoarse?
They eat leaves.
Well, they eat leaves, they eat bark, they eat phloem, they eat all sorts of things. But the reason they're a big problem, Peter, is beetles are the biggest order of animals or living things worldwide. Huge numbers. So beetles are going to be something that you're going to come across on a regular basis. And we even have one whole group as you say, Peter, dedicated to eating leaves, and that's our leaf-eating beetles or Chrysmelidae. So that group of beetles can be quite problematic. In fact, there's one there. This is fig leaf beetle. You know, it's a group of beetles that causes grief. And if I put in beetle, again, not the best search engine. I'm just using Google within my own package. We get a whole range of different things. This is a good guy. This is scale-eating beetle. So that, again, you can't just say because it's a beetle, we've got to get rid of it, or because it's a beetle in a tree. If you saw this, and this got to fairly heavy levels in a tree out the front of my place, beautiful markings on it, great little insect. But of course, I was in favor of having it because it's doing a job. At some stage or other, you'll have all seen this one. Yep. Anyone not seen it?
Seen it.
Looks a bit like a longicorn beetle.
It does look a little bit like a longicorn beetle. This is a soldier beetle. And I'm hoping that I can pull up a soldier beetle image for you. Let's see if I can do that. They get to plague proportions. And when they do, yep, here we are. When they do, people get to the stage where they start saying, oh, I got plague beetle, you know, I'm worried about it. And they can get to the hundreds of thousands in a tree. But this is this needing to understand. These guys, for example, are good guys. They have two roles. They start their life, and as their larval stage, they're insectivores. That is, they eat insects. In the adult stage, they pollen, but that's often a trade-off that plants use in letting the pollen get chewed in order for the pollen to get spread. So they can be important for pollination. However, when there's not a lot of pollen around, these guys will go back to being insectivores as adults as well. So they're really good guys. So when you go out and you see 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 or 100,000 of these in a tree, and they get to those sort of numbers, the little old lady or the paranoid old gentleman, doesn't matter which way, and no gender bias there intended. When you get to that stage that they go out there and say, I'm going to kill them all off, they're actually not doing any favor. They're actually doing a harm for what they're doing. So, and again, this is just to remind you that beetles are involved in the process of pollination. So at an adult stage, how do I know it's a beetle? Well, there's some giveaways. First of all, beetles have a hard front forewings. Their front forewings give a hard covering over the back, and it divides right down the middle of the thorax down through to the abdomen. And so that divided line, you can see it here. This is armleaf beetle, that nice little line that goes all the way through. This is a wing. This is a modified wing, but it's still a wing. So that's one of the characteristics. The other thing that beetles have is they have a folding wing. And I'm going to see if I can find a folding wing for you. By the way, there's more soldier beetles in quantity. You can see it's not an uncommon thing, particularly during the summer months when reproduction is at its highest. So to find you a folded wing, I've got to go back to insects. I apologize. Now, these guys fit into an order called Coleoptera. And if you want to know how you remember Coleoptera, I'll tell you how I tortured every single member of my family, particularly my kids, to remember that. And that is, every time the beetles came on, I would say, it's the Coleopteras. So whatever you've got to do to communicate and learn things is important. Okay, let me go back to insect again, and I should be able to get you down. So folding wing is one of the characteristics of a beetle. I saw it there in the upper ones. No, let me try this. Beetle. Yeah, okay. Hopefully this will get us there. So this is a beetle. The elytra has been lifted up. Ugh. No. Won't let me go back. And because it's done that, I'm going to get even and open image in a new tab. Now it can't ask me to do that. That'll teach it. So we've got this folded wing. So this collapses up underneath. And you can go watch this now in what they call super slow motion videos. They'll actually show you the wing coming out, unfolding, pumping up and flying. Now, that takes some time to do. Can we all agree with that? That to open up a wing and get everything ready and get the system ready to launch, these guys aren't like butterflies where the wings are ready to go and they can go. So one of the techniques that adult beetles often use to defend themselves is they drop to the ground. Okay, they'll simply just fall off and hit the ground because it's quicker and easier for them to hit the ground than it is to fold their things out. And they've got this inbuilt crash pad system. So we see falling because we're big, heavy things is bad. For the beetle, that's not a problem. So that's a beetle. And there's a nice little sequence there that shows you the folding of that wing. Sorry, guys. I'm going to have to buy everyone a lamb roast. Don't I? Okay. So that's one of the things that make beetles different. That and these elytra. Have I got you there? Yep, I have. Okay.
So I've been seeing a few shots of weevils mixed in amongst these, and they're beetles as well.
Weevils are wonderful beetles.
I like weevils.
I do too, Peter, obviously, as you've gathered. Weevils are beetles with long snouts. Okay, not always. There's the exception. And we'll get a little bit into what Carl Linnaeus did and how he screwed things up. But this is a beetle. This is, again, called a proboscis or a rostrum. Rostrum is the big bit at the front of a boat that sticks out, or at the front of a lecture theatre, the thing that sits up and you put your lecture notes on is sometimes called a rostrum. So rostrum is just this thing that sticks out. So those are two terms you'll see for it. And these have interesting antennae. The antennae are usually geniculate, whatever that means. It simply means, well, Michele, you've gone to a church, you're Italian, and you genuflex and you bend, okay? It simply means bent. No, not weird bent, as in bending oneself. So bending. So this is a bent antenna, and it bends here at the first junction. So that's a good characteristic. Another thing that's interesting about weevils is they're a group of beetles that have scale on them. Other insects have scales, but these guys do. Lots of beetles don't have scales, but weevils do. This is the Botany Bay Weevil. This is the first beetle described in Australia, and this is feeds on acacias. And again, if you look carefully, you can see those little scales growing off it. Their scales, this isn't the same thing that others do. This looks very similar. This is a acacia longicorn, not a weevil, and that just goes to show you some of those things that look similar but aren't the same. So again, weevil, one of the giveaways is that geniculate antennae. And weevils are an order of, a family of beetles within the order Coleoptera. And their family is Curculionidae. And I remember that by thinking circle. And interestingly enough, this is a snout beetle, or again, another weevil who's just sitting on an ice cream bean tree or ignoregulus in my driveway. I was walking past and took a shot of it. They're just iPhone shots. They're not great shots. But again, they're letting you know that weevils have that snout. So it doesn't mean just because it's got a snout that it's a weevil, but it's one of those things that you're more likely to think about. So let me show you another weevil that's really unusual. And I'm pretty sure I've got it saved here as platypus. Yes, this is platypus. This little guy here is a weevil. You can't see it particularly easily, but it's definitely got a clubbed antennae, and it's bent. You can see here there's a bend in the antennae, and this particular weevil introduces a fungus with it and kills Pitosma undulatum. Creates a nice round hole, and that's the top side of the beetle. So definitely a beetle, and it's got what we call the downward dog style of things, very short proboscis. So again, we give you these rules and then we tell you that they're probably not perfect, but there's the bent antennae. Can you see that? So let me zoom in a little bit more. The bend in the antenna, quite short one in this one.
Do they tend to have preferred food types?
We don't know that much. Part of the problem is there's the hole, Peter, and that's the end of a car key.
Yeah.
So it took me probably a dozen times of seeing a tree destroyed by it before I got to figure out that it was a weevil. But they often are responsible for introducing a fungi, or at least helping the spread of a fungi. So weevils are generally not problems on trees. A lot of them are detrivore eaters again, so they're eating dead material or they're eating things that we don't care about, like grasses and grains and things like that. So they're a major pest of grains or seeds. And so we can have problems with them affecting seed set on trees. So they're not without their problems, but again, in most cases, they're not a big issue. They don't get to huge proportions. But then there's that odd one, like the one we just looked at then, that can be. So yeah, that's just a sort of beetle. And I said to you earlier on, well, we said this is a ladybird. A ladybird, most ladybirds are really good guys. This one's a fungus-eating ladybird. Right? Fancy that. A ladybird that comes around and helps clean up the fungus. So it's a good guy. A lot of ladybirds are insectivores, that is, they're eating other insects. So they're great as well. So ladybirds aren't normally a problem, but some can be. I'll go back to the beetle page again. And I've already discussed that. Again, this is a ladybird that's eating. This particular one, these are jewel beetles, and they have pointed bums. Often they're very quite brightly colored. But this particular one's a major problem on Christmas bush and stressed eucalypts. This is, can anyone remember what it's called? It'll come to me. But major problem is a boring insect. And again,
I don't know about that, Mark, but I do recall something about the larvae, identification of the larvae being interesting with...
Oh, it's a horrible one, identifying the larvae of jewel beetle, because they look very similar to longicorn. One of the things that jewel beetle larvae do is they make these crescentric or crescent-shaped markings. So longicorn larvae tends not to have any of those crescent shapes that you're seeing in there. Don't ask me why. There are, you see that crescent shaped, that crescent shaped, that crescent shape. So that's if you take off some bark and you see the crescent markings. Phil Hadlington made the comment that you generally, so Phil Hadlington was a brilliant entomologist and one of the guys that helped start the tree surgery come tree care industry in Australia. And so his comments were, generally when you see jewel beetle larvae, you've got a tree that's on its way out and it's going to die. And there's certainly some good evidence to suggest that's often the case, but not always. So yes, there are lots of other orders of beetles. One of the ones that you see come up a lot here in these pictures are these funny looking things with 10 antennae segments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, can't count. These guys are Crismillidae, or the leaf eating insects, and they're often round to oval in shape. So they look a lot like the ladybirds, but they're not ladybirds. So this is a beetle. These particular ones, here we are, some better shots of it. That one earlier on. Nascio vetusta. I'll leave that up there on the screen for a few seconds. Nascio vetusta, Vetusta. So it's the cause of metacidrus decline. Interestingly enough, it's now been reported to be a problem in some areas with Tristaniopsis lorena luscius. I was wondering when someone would sort that out for me. Tristaniopsis lorena luscius is a clonal specimen. And when you plant clonal species, they're all genetically the same. If they've got a weakness and something finds it, that can sometimes be a problem. And so that's a jewel beetle, or Buprestidae. Another one that we have a lot of problems with in trees are Cerambycidae, or the longicorn group. And you can see here it's got an eye that's crescent shaped. So that's one of the characteristics. It's crescent shaped around, so it's wrapped around the antennae. They have long antennae, so quite long. And this one's Pittosporum longicorn, okay, identifiable by the dot patterns on the back. And this is where science doesn't do us well. One of the problems with common names is that they can be misleading. This is a Polyphages insect. Now, Polyphages, that's another new entomology word, or a new word for us tonight. Polyphages means it eats on many different plants from a broad range of genus or genera. So it's not just one genera. Oligophages is,
Mark, do they have a distinctive number of segments in the antennae?
I'm sure they do, Peter, but don't ask me. The critical bit with the antennae is it's most the length of the body or longer. Males have longer antennae, females have shorter antennae, and we'll explain why that is in terms of sexual reproduction later on. So these guys are polyphagous. They'll feed on a broad range of plant material. There's another one that's like that, and that's Agronomi Spinacolis. That's not. That's a deadwood feeder. I might have to type in Agronomi. Just see in a second. Make them flick down. Crescent shaped markings, guys. You know that is, again, jewel beetle larvae, not longicorn. And so jewel beetle, if you're seeing that, remember that's usually the death knell of the tree. That usually means the tree is not going to live much longer. This is Agronomi Spinacolis. This beetle here gets to about 5 centimeters long at its largest. And this longicorn feeds on a huge range of trees. I can list probably 30 genera, commonly eucalyptus, casuarina, allocasuarina, acer, shyness, liquid amber, quercus, brachychiton,
Poinciana.
Poinciana, because Poinciana is where it gets its common name. It's commonly called the Poinciana longicorn. It was discovered by Macleay. Macleay was a famous Australian entomologist. I think it was 1904 that he described it. It's somewhere around then, anyhow. And yet its reputation in Poinciana gets its name. Elm, poplar, so it goes on. Just broad range of material, and it weakens the stem rapidly. So this can lead to limb failure, branch failure, tree failure. If the tree is healthy, it'll often outgrow. But here's how this happens, and this is why we need to talk about sexual reproduction. And I think, Peter, it might have to be our last one for the night. We'll talk about this. And the next block round, we'll look at a little bit more on those last few remaining insect orders and major insects of concern. These guys come out, and we call them longicorn. Longicorn is a bastardization, Michele, of the word longhorned, or meaning long antennae. Okay, and so these guys come out and they need to find a mate. And these guys don't survive long. They might last a week or two outside once they've pupated. They're not long-lived beetles, so quite short-lived. So reproduction is a high priority. When you're going to be an adult for 7 days, I'm guaranteeing you that reproduction is something you're going to want to think about. You know, we're adults for so long, we don't think about it. It's just, you know, part of life. For these guys, it's a matter of urgency. And the males need to find a female. Now, there's a rule in nature that your sister's off limits. So when you come out of a tree, you've got to find a female that's different to your sister. So your direct relative. And so the male needs to find females. And the way he does that is he smells with his antennae. Odd way, I know, we've got noses and we think that, but these guys can sense with their antennae. And insect capacity to smell and directionally orientate themselves on the chemicals put out, called pheromones. So these chemicals are put out by females is phenomenal. They can pinpoint accuracy to over 30 kilometers. That is exactly the same, and I'll get in trouble for it, and I apologize, but that would be like me saying, Cameron Diaz has just landed at Mascot Airport, and I can smell her from here. That is freaky wrong, okay? But that's what these guys have got to do, otherwise they aren't going to survive. The female attracts a male, the male comes in, he's not a direct relative, thank goodness for that. And they play their inappropriate parlor behavior. And then she needs to find a tree to lay on. She needs a tree with a wound, ideally with some fungi growing on it already, to go and have a feed, okay, to lay her eggs so that they can survive. And so she thinks about it. And she doesn't think, by the way, I'm just anthropomorphizing, but she thinks about it and she says, well, you know, the family home was fairly good. And that's where she is. She's usually sitting on the family home. She's just come out of the hole. She's taking a day or so to harden up. And all of a sudden, she's saying, well, maybe this is where I lay. So they tend to relay. What we want to do is stop them from laying again. So when you see Agronomy Spinacholis, one of the things you want to do is stop them from relaying. These guys like injured stems, stem injuries. A flush cut is a stem injury. So bad cuts. Okay. A stub cut will leave a stub injury. Not as bad, but still a problem. Ficus, by the way, is another genera that they can completely destroy. So they are just a major problem when they get going and they start to reproduce and relay. It takes 2 years to get to maturity, or at least 2 years. It can sometimes take longer. Insects and a number of animals can do this process of slowing things down a bit or slowing it down a lot, called a diapause. So diapause is just a slowing of the process, putting things on hold. So these are what we call a semi-voltine insect. Voltine is about the number of generations in a year. So You can have a univoltine, one generation a year, bivoltine, multiple, univoltine, multivol, I can't think. These are a hemivoltine or a hemivoltine, once every 2 years. So voltine is the word again, thinking about that generations. So this particular longicorn serves to give you the example. Peter, you said earlier on, really hard picking the difference between jewel beetle and longicorn beetle, particularly first and second instar larvae. I haven't mastered how to describe it, but they look different, and on many occasions I've seen them described differently. So we'll look at beetles a little bit more next time round. Here's a common leaf beetle that's become a problem in horticulture and in arboriculture. We have now dwarfed pittosporums, and pittosporums we use in a hedge. This is the pittosporum leaf beetle. Again, first instar, second instar, third instar, adult. So these are starting to decimate pittosporum hedges periodically. And I'll show you a decimation shot so you know that I'm serious when I say it. That's what we're talking about. This is just complete destruction. All stages in this particular Crismillidae feed on the leaves. Other Crismillidae feed on the roots and then feed on the leaves, or feed on roots of different plants and then feed on the leaves. And during the earlier stages up here, I'm pretty sure there is a, and if it's not, it's in the insect one. You would have seen earlier on plague beetle or red shoulder beetle. Should be able to get it from red shoulder beetle. Monolepta australis. Monoleptus australis comes out in, no, S-H-O-U would be helpful if I could spell, wouldn't it? Yeah, this is Monolepta australis. This can get into populations up in your end of the world, Peter, in Queensland. Go from, you might see 2 or 3 to within an hour or two seeing 2,000 or 3,000 to within a day of seeing 2 or 3 million. So
certainly used to be a major pest of macadamia plantations. I'm not sure about now.
Major pest of avocados. So yes, it's one of those pests that really can destroy the world quite quickly around it. And I will pick up a picture of it there. It is destroying the leaves of a tree. And that morning there was none of them. That was about 11 o'clock in the day. They'd now started to get up, and I have sprayed. They're again quite sensitive to a number of insecticides. I've sprayed Monolepta to the point that I've had a carpet. There was nothing else but yellow and red on the ground. The population had got so high. I think they're fairly cute beetle, but they will eat pretty well anything and everything. They love flowers, destroy flowers. So crepe myrtles are out usually when they're out. They'll rip into those. As I said, this is my ignorant edulus again. Everything wants to destroy it, and they've completely stripped it, I guess, within 2 hours or 3 hours. So the problem with something like this one is you don't get any warning. You just occasionally come up with that perfect outbreak. And I've had on the property here 3 outbreaks in 30 years. So about once every 10 years, to give you a sort of a benchmark. Okay, that guys, look, we could go on insects for another few hours. What I want you to do during the next 5 weeks, you get a longer break this time around, is find something that you have that's feeding on a tree, send the image to Peter, and let's discuss it next time around, so that we're looking at stuff that you guys are seeing. That'll help give better context, and it'll help you figure out whether what you're looking at is a problem or what you're looking at is a good guy. Remember, the vast percentage of insects aren't going to be a problem for plant material. a small proportion will be. Okay, guys, I'll catch you next 2 weeks' time with war. Is that right, Peter? Your mic's off, I think.
Yes, that's correct. 2 weeks' time, we'll be doing a war session.
Okay, guys, I'll speak to you all then.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks,
Bob.
guys.
Thank you.